What's up, guys? It's DK. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. Why are you even here, though? Didn't you know Ginger Man bad?
Danish esports organisation North are largely a laughingstock in CSGO now, primarily due to how much money people were aware they were initially funded with, and as a result it's perceived that they've spent on salaries, etc., and yet how little success they've actually generated in terms of trophies, top placings, and consistent high world ranking over the span of time that they have been North, not when they were Dignitas before, where they had that nice little run towards the end of 2016. But also, let's be real, because they're in the same market, Denmark, as Astralis, their main rivals domestically and in theory internationally, but they haven't really been a true rival to Astralis, and obviously Astralis have gone on to become the greatest of all time. They've even, in the span of the last couple of years, lost their core identity as at least the clear-cut second best Danish team, and even the idea that they were a farm team for Astralis. Like, now you actually don't see Astralis coming and taking place from North. Instead, they're going to Mad Lions or Heroic. They're not coming to North because North aren't relevant in that sense. So, quite frankly, at the moment, they can't be either of those two things, the second best Danish team, or even just a farm team for an Astralis, at least bringing through the next talents. Well, it wasn't always that way, was it? They used to be the clear-cut second best Danish team. In fact, at one point in time, late 2017, they were even arguably slightly pulling ahead of Astralis when Astralis was starting to gradually slump and Device had his injuries and no one knew where the Kirby lineup was going to end up, who was going to stay, who was going to leave. Actually, we know now, for 2018, they wanted to sign all 5 players, which probably would have precluded this GOAT Astralis era because they wouldn't have brought in Magisk and they still would have had Kirby. So it just shows you how you never know what is a positive or a negative in terms of someone leaving, someone joining, someone making the right or the wrong move in the moment. So they were not only the clear second best Danish team at one point in time, they were a top 5 team in the world as Dignitas at the end of 2016, and even at certain points in time in 2017, probably not in 2018 realistically, even with that Stockholm win. So then they came to North and they were what? They were a top 10 team most of the time. I mean, in their first 2 majors as North, they had top 8 finishes. They made the Legends slot, something they've never done as Dignitas. They both times lost to Virtus Pro when Virtus Pro was still a strong team. The first one, if people remember, was where the third map was that epic Magisk performance on Cobblestone, where he went absolutely ham in the first half. It looked like they'd all but reached the semis, and somehow they managed to lose the game. Admittedly, they were playing Virtus Pro and in the playoffs of a major, an epic and legendary team that you basically got to be like capable of winning the major to put away usually. Then, of course, right after that particular major, the E-League Major Atlanta, they had the DreamHack Masters Vegas tournament where they were like top 4. They were looking like they could have gone to the final over SK. We could have, in theory, when they were in the semi-finals, had an all-Danish final. They could have contended for the title. Not long after that, they had the ESL Pro League Season 5 finals where they made it all the way there ahead of the likes of SK Gaming. Then later on, the latter part of the North period in 2017, coming into 2018, we had what was a pretty good lineup that had real potential, but only showed glimpses. We had the lineup where they had MSL, AZ, Cage, and B as their core still. They still had Config, and then who did they bring in instead of Magisk? Valde, who actually obviously was coming from strength to strength to strength, and now, since then, has become an extremely good player, but was already starting to show signs of it there. They were in the DreamHack Masters Malmo final, if you remember. The problem is, back then, the talent that they had access to put them on the brink of being, if not as good as Astralis, just outside of that. They had the best Danish players, basically, that weren't in Astralis, minus Carrigan. And obviously, as a player, he's not that great, but in terms of as an in-game leader, a truly good in-game leader, he was obviously over in FaZe Clan at the time. You had Heroic there, but Heroic only ever pulled level with North at most. They were never ahead of them as a top team, and most of the time they were the clear-cut third best Danish team. There was a hierarchy that made sense, and the talent, at least that weren't in Astralis, came through the doors of North at this time. Then you come to the 2018 period, though, where they start to lose the talents, Config, etc., eventually MSL. Yeah, they had the DreamHack Masters Stockholm, that epic fluke run out of nowhere where they beat the GOAT Astralis team twice in one tournament where MSL wins the MVP, Orping of all things, against Device in the final. Yes, so many unexpected things, but that was a one-off. They didn't have much outside of that, and as a result, that's just considered a fluke. The very fact that like a month later they went and just bombed out the major before they'd even made top 16, yeah, that was somewhat indicative of the fact that it wasn't that legit a result, even though in that 1 week they looked amazing. They also had an incredibly hard bracket run, if anyone remembers. So, quite frankly, they've never recovered from when after that they decided to kick MSL. The Kirby pickup hadn't worked anyway and did not continue to work. Yeah, it won them like a DreamHack Open Summer or whatever the fuck. Who gives a shit? Being the MVP of a DreamHack Open is not a worthy category for someone like Kirby to be in for what he was being paid, what he was supposed to do, and what he had thus far to that point in time hinted at with his potential. That is failure. I'm sorry, it just is. Then, more importantly though, the topic of this video, they missed everyone else. Everyone else who was an actual talent in the Danish scene, they successfully missed, ignored, decided they didn't want, wouldn't bring back, and instead the people they picked up were so underwhelming. So whether it was an established player who was good, who they should have spent big for, they didn't go and do that. Whether it was an up-and-coming player, they never got the right ones. They just got all the ones that ended up being busts and bombs and just average players. Like, look at the talent that they had. So they had MSL, clearly one of the 10 best in-game leaders in all of Counter-Strike for practically every year he's been an in-game leader. So they kicked him, of course, rather than kick other players and spend big and buy him some big name players. No. Kick MSL. Eventually they had to come back on their hands and knees and beg him to come back. Who were they going to get who was better than him? It's the same with FaZe kicking Carrigan. Like, homie, who did you think was coming through that door? Did you think Fallen or Glaive or some legendary IGL was coming through? They weren't. So then to kick Carrigan is actually a tragedy. Similarly, to kick MSL was just folly. It was foolishness. And they did it for fucking Cadian of all people. What, was he going to be better than MSL's an IGL? Pretty unlikely, especially because he didn't have the talent to make a really good sort of fragging lineup. Now he's actually got a fairly similar team in Heroic. If anything, he's got better talent there. And if anything, they're slightly better than North was looking under his tenure. They were at best only going to do like single map upsets. They had Valde, a clear-cut player who, with his mentality, his work ethic, his all-round game, you never let a player like this go. If he goes to Astralis and for Megabucks, fair play, you can't do much about that. But he should never be going to a team like OG, a team that isn't even a contender, has never come close, quite frankly. The idea that they wasted his time when he was in the team and then let him walk, that is just bad management for my money, and it shows how poorly this team was run. He's actually, by the way, had a brutal run when you consider that he didn't get into Astralis when he was at his peak, when they had the GOAT lineup, and then look at the bums who've made it into Astralis since then, or the average players, or the players nowhere near even his level back then in North, who've since made it through. Meanwhile, Valde's stuck over on OG, where they've got their own problems right there, and their own lack of big firepower. Then you consider, as well as Valde, as well as MSL, I mean, you're already starting to make a very good lineup here. They had Config and Magisk, clear Hall of Fame level star talents in terms of their career trajectory. Both end up getting kicked due to attitude issues. Now listen, I don't think it's that some of the other teams fixed their issues. I think those players had to fix them for themselves, and certainly they were very young, so I'll give North a little bit of a pass for that. But the idea that you weren't looking to bring these guys straight back or find a way to reintegrate them, like, they just were the clear talents, and because you couldn't use them, you had to wait years for these other talents to come through, and then if you're North, you missed them all. So let's look at this talent that they've missed. Basically, it's the players, some Mad Lions / Tricked, and remember, when they were Tricked, you could have had any of these guys. Heroic, again, you could get most of them. I mean, Astralis certainly seems to. It's funny that Heroic CEO talks about doing a lawsuit and how he dislikes Astralis. Can't help just bend it over backwards to just give them players and prop them up and help them and make them not be a joke, of course. And then we're talking about Copenhagen Flames players. Because that's right, Copenhagen Flames were nobodies. They're what, 3rd, 4th, 5th best Danish team at times. But they've even had talent that's come through the door better than some of the North players. And North's even missed them. So let's consider straight out the gate. If we look at current world Counter-Strike, the first name you're missing if you're North has to be Mad Lions player A-Core, right? Because first of all, he was in your academy team. You just never used him as an AWPer because you thought Mertz was a better AWPer. Secondly, he's the obvious person to be in an MSL team, a guy who likes or has always wanted to have a dominant AWPer, but has just never had one since his old mate Nico, who quite frankly was never good under MSL's leadership, but used to be great back in Western Wolves back in 2013, which I'll remind you was 7 years ago now, guys. So let that go. And instead he had Cajun B after that, Config even secondary AWP, MSL himself as AWP. He had bum-ass Yogi when Yogi was years beyond his prime. He's just Mertz. He's just never had a good AWPer. This is a dominant AWPer. This is an AWPer who could be used in a tactical system. He's a perfect player for MSL when you see what he's become in Mad Lions. But never got through the door again into the real North team. They could have had Bobski. He was off playing on Fragsters where he had a little bit of potential. And I couldn't see that he was going to be a top player, but you see what he's developed into. Why were people not close to this guy, keeping tabs on him, checking where he was at, and then scoop him up while he's in Fragsters or while he's in Trick before he gets to Mad Lions? And quite frankly, even in Mad Lions, you can buy the players apparently. So I don't know why that isn't possible. Like, why wasn't he going to North now? Why weren't they outbidding Astralis? This is a guy who's become a very unique player. He's got clear talent, especially this year, and now he's in Astralis, for fuck's sake. And no one even knows if he's a starter yet, although it's certainly my suspicion he is, because if he otherwise, I don't know why he would join that team. Then they could have had Blame F, a big-time fragger, has real potential to be a banger individually, and can be an in-game leader. So if you don't want to go the MSL route, you could have gambled on Blame F, right? You could have brought him over when he was in Heroic. You could have got him when he was in Epsilon. Didn't bother, of course. Again, never identified any of the talent. How about some other pieces from the Mad Lions? So Shush is an obvious one. He's becoming a very solid piece. He looks to me like he has... I don't think he's ever going to be like a great player, but I think he could be a great 3-position player. He looks like he's got that sort of skill. He's a very stable piece. He's got unique strengths. He seems to have a very good mindset overall. Nice all-round game, can play some difficult CT spots. You look at a Copenhagen Flames player like Tessus, nice aim, mechanical skill, very gettable when he was in Copenhagen Flames, but of course they don't get him in the North. You had another Copenhagen Flames player in Farlig, an AWPer, better than MSL as an AWPer, by the way. Listen, he's not on the A-Court level, but I'd have gambled on this guy. Obviously, the other Mad Lions player is Roy. When you consider what Nico and Gade's impact as an entry was in this North team, it's fairly underwhelming overall, except maybe Nico's run when they were at the DreamHack Stockholm when he was on trial. Beyond that, they've really suffered for not having a good entry. Roy is an older guy. He's been around the scene, but look at the impact he has in Mad Lions. Look how he plays his role. This guy, it's exactly what you want from like a veteran role player, basically. Then let's just chuck in a couple that I'm not a huge fan of, but other people certainly tout. And I think if they had the right team, they could be good. Borup, 2 heroic players, basically. Hasn't made it, but when he was in Tricked, he certainly had potential. People thought he was actually the star player. This is pre-heroic. Esatag, obviously in heroic for many, many years, but has played all these different roles. He looks a lot more stable than some of the Gades, etc., that they've had in North. Why doesn't he get a shot? Doesn't, of course, and now he's in Astralis as well. We could literally have had lineups. Like, I made 3 different lineups with a different style and generally trying to make the roles. Think about these 3 lineups and realise what North could have accomplished if they've had any of these 3. So they could have maybe had one that was like Carrigan, because they could have had him, by the way, but they essentially said no, is what my source said, in late 2018, so they could have had, or early 2019 rather. They could have had Carrigan as in-game leader, could have had Valde as a supportive element, a 3-position, one of the best 3 positions in the world, I would guess. Config as a star player, Acor as a star player. Admittedly, that one's more of a reach. You'd have to really guess in advance. If not Acor, you could pick someone else there. Someone like a Roy, if they were available as an entry type player. If not, put in an Eco, put in someone else there. You still got a really nice basis of a team. Now imagine what Carrigan could do with these fraggers. How about a lineup with MSL? So you could have MSL as your IGL. You could have Farlig as his AWPer. You could have Valde as his 2nd or his 3-position player. You could have Blame F as just a fragger. Set him up as like a mid-round type player. Give him a little bit of secondary calling power. Let him do basically like follow-up type roles, farm kills, have a Bobski to go with him as this like incredible like aggressive lurk or entry player. Look at that banger lineup. And here's one more for you. Again, a different IGL. How about Blame F as your IGL? And then you have Valde as your player. Then you have Acor as your AWPer. You have Bobski as like a star player. And you have Config as just an aim machine and entry player. These lineups are straight fire. These are better than any lineup in Danish CS except Astralis. And North could not navigate, position themselves, plan, scout, ever set up or conceptualize teams like these. They just let these players get past them, go elsewhere, or didn't acquire them again, or just didn't even see them as having talent. So many of the problems in North, some of them I actually feel some sympathy for them with. I know sometimes they've zigged when they should have zagged, as it were. Like they had Acor in North Academy, but unfortunately they didn't recognise him as an AWPer at the time. They had Ave as their academy coach and later as their main team coach, a guy I consider one of the genius minds of Counter-Strike. Maybe wasn't quite adapted to CSGO. It was one of his first big gigs. They had some of the backroom stuff like Wimp that was trying to play like a veteran role and set up the cut. Just didn't happen with the lineups that he had. I think he was there in the worst time period, unfortunately, and the tough decisions he made did not work. Those are moves that do get you fired, unfortunately. They also had the pieces over the years to make top teams, but just not all at once. They also had the resources and the staff that an Astralis does. They had the psychologists, the facilities, legitimacy within the region and within like political and sporting contacts. In theory, better backing in that regard than Astralis, although Astralis obviously has that dodgy little thing where they somehow got in with certain politicians, which certainly seems suspicious. I'd love to see if any of them have any stock. That's all I'm going to say. But you look at the pickups that North did in the last few years. They picked up Mertz. I told you this guy wasn't going to make it immediately. Didn't make it. Wasn't the type of AWPer that an MSL wants in his system. Gade, again, wasn't convincing in Optic. Wasn't convincing for me in North. Cadian, seeing as he was there for the IGL, if you just make him like a fragger and a third position player, yeah, you could do some things with Cadian. This wasn't the way to use him though. And then Yogi, he was years past his potential and his prime, and if you know behind the scenes some of the stories, you would never go near a guy like this. This was desperation in my opinion when they did the move for him, just hoping he comes back from the dead as it were. So where do they even go now if you're North? They're not even probably going to be Danish if you heard the rumours. Basically, it's essentially implied that Lekro is just going to be their new player, which, quite frankly, is an indictment of where they've positioned themselves. One of the most talent-rich scenes with tons of players. Every couple of years, players coming through, and they can't get them. They can't get the other good Danish players or legendary or decorated players that aren't in an Astralis, and they've let all of their own talents go, and now they're in this position where they're going to recruit a Swede and a bunch of other players, it would seem. That is a real indictment of where they're at as a team. I will also say they were a bit unlucky with the crop of players that they had of that 2017-2018 in terms of the rising talents. They weren't the ones who made it. It was the ones after that in this Mad Lions / heroic generation that's really come to the fore, at which point in time maybe North had blown their budget. They were down to being more of a gamble org and they had to go with safer picks. But they've really mismanaged it and their windows have been, gone and closed as far as I can tell. This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Whattathings, Spencer Green, Soliko, Dean Tanglis, Jack Hanna, Hades, Jensen Goh, the Puyallup Tribe, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to put a question to me in my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers for my upcoming content? Or maybe to even take part in an online esports discussion with moi? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.